So we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. So we're going to start off with a little bit of a story. So imagine this. You're the primary developer for a fast-growing e-commerce business. Just this morning, you deployed several new changes to the site. You're ready to sit back, relax, and enjoy your time here at PHP World. However, as you sit in a session just like this one, you get a frantic email from the office. The CEO is checking the site, and he discovered what he feels is a major bug in an existing feature. He's convinced your code broke his site. So now, instead of enjoying this session, you're trying to think of how the changes you deployed could have even caused this problem. You're almost certain you didn't break the site, but you didn't have time to test everything. So preventing this horrible feeling, which I know many of us have experienced before, is what my session today is all about. This is something that strikes fear into our team. I actually have a poster of that up in my office. Do not be this guy. Do not do that. So before we go any further, my name is Joshua Warren. I'm the CEO of Creatuity Corp. We're a Magento-focused development agency. We started out as a PHP development agency, and now a majority of our work is in Magento. I've actually been developing with PHP since 1999. I've been working with Magento for almost 7 years. Been doing this so long, our interns actually think that this is what my first computer looked like. They like to give me a hard time about that. So my talk today is about automated testing with Magento, and I'm going to focus on very real, very practical elements of testing. We're not going to be debating the merits of different testing methodologies as an abstract concept. We're not going to be arguing about percentages of code coverage. Instead, we're going to look at the reality of automated testing in Magento and how it benefits and protects both developers and clients. Before we dive in, though, I want to set aside a few different points for the sake of time. First of all, today we're going to talk about Magento 1. There's some great changes coming to Magento 2 eventually. It's going to make testing much, much easier, much better for all of us. However, Magento 1 is going to be around for quite some time still. I see merchants, in my opinion, will be using it for at least 3 or 4 more years, so it's important to learn testing with Magento 1. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Next up, we're going to focus on Magento sites, not specific individual Magento extensions, but a complete functioning Magento site. If you're writing an extension, you have a lot of options for unit testing that you just don't have when you're working with a complete site. Finally, if you're coming from another PHP-based system, some of the things we talk about today might surprise you. You might say, wait, you guys are just starting to do this? Magento 1 was very ahead of its time in 2008, but it was designed in 2008. So as a community, we've kind of lagged for a while in adopting the latest and greatest tools from PHP and the greater PHP community into Magento. Luckily, that's really changing lately, and that's basically what my talk is all about. So I am going to talk about some specific tools today, but the most important thing is that you should be testing. That's what I want you to take away from this. If you have a tool that you're already using or that you like better or that you just like the way it looks, use that. Don't assume that just because I said this is the tool that I use, that that's the tool you have to use. The most important thing is to find tools you like and use them. I'm going to put my presentation up on Joined In, and do please rate the talk on Joined In. I know a lot of the speakers have been saying that, but we all really mean it. We want your feedback. So when you go to Joined In later today, you'll be able to get a link to all the slides, so you don't have to worry about writing down every little thing. I'm also going to be tweeting the link to Joined In later, so you can just follow me on Twitter and you can get it from there. Do tweet at me if you have any feedback, any questions. Even if you get back to work next week, you're sitting there, you're trying to apply some of this, and you don't quite remember something or it's not working quite right, just send me a tweet. I'd love to talk. So speaking of Twitter, I ran a survey on Twitter not too long ago to Magento developers asking what sort of testing that they were doing on their projects. I do appreciate everybody that retweeted it. It was seen by quite a few different developers, got a lot of great responses, and a lot of people really took the time to fill it out, and I appreciate that. So the results were roughly what I expected from just talking to Magento community members. But before we dive into that, I just want to kind of repeat the survey here. So any of y'all currently developing with Magento, raise your hand. Okay, keep your hands up. How many of y'all are doing automated testing with Magento? Okay, so there's one. Awesome. Good job. So the rest of you, why aren't you testing right now in Magento?
Testing. I don't know how.
Don't know how? Okay.
Just not automated.
Just not automated? Why not automated?
I assume if your children go barefoot.
Yeah. That's common, so.
Convincing clients of the misconception that testing earlier is cheaper than testing later.
What about you? No time? Yeah. So don't feel bad. 75% of Magento developers surveyed are not conducting any automated testing of their Magento projects. None at all. I did a testing talk at a Magento conference a couple of months ago. Even in that room, the most common response was, I'm kind of testing, so don't feel bad. This is very common. Not very many people are testing. I was concerned. Some developers, when they're introduced to Magento, say, oh, Magento is very complex. It's a complex system. It's hard to understand. So I thought, okay, people must not be testing because they think it's too hard. They think Magento is too complex. However, less than 20% of people said that's why they weren't testing. Your response, actually, was the number one reason that developers said they weren't testing: lack of budget. They could not convince either their boss or their client to pay for it. So that is the most common reason. Second most common reason is lack of knowledge. They just don't know how to test. That's one of the reasons why I'm getting this talk out there as much as I can and just talking about automated testing, because once you learn the basics of it and you start applying it, it is a lot easier than I think you probably are thinking that it is, and it has some great benefits. Finally, lack of time was the third most common reason for not performing automated testing. They just said they just didn't have the time in the day. So based on those results, before we dive into the specifics of testing, I real quick want to go through why testing is important. You need to be able to explain to your boss, to your client, to your stakeholders, why they need to invest in automated testing. So it may not seem like it when you're first starting out with automated testing, but it saves time and money. With a little bit of planning, automated testing allows you to perform in-depth testing of every part of Magento every time you make a change. There's no way that you could ever have the time to do that manually. So that is a great advantage of automated testing. It also saves money. It keeps your projects healthier and on track and on time. Testing keeps projects healthier by allowing Magento developers to focus on the task at hand, developing new features. I mean, in this room, how many of you would rather fix a bug than implement a new feature? Anybody? Really? Okay. Yeah. And some people find it a fun challenge. But for most of us, we'd rather be developing new features. And so automated testing allows us to focus on the new features and not have to constantly go back and fix bugs. And the reason for that is because with automated testing, you're finding bugs and you're fixing them as you're actually developing the code. It doesn't get out there on production and suddenly you have a bug. You find it as you're writing the code. You fix it right away. That's important because it keeps you from being interrupted. The more often you're interrupted, the less productive you are. Specifically, one interruption to fix a bug that slipped past your QA process can cost the best developers 15 minutes of lost productivity. The rest of us, it costs us a lot more than that. Specifically, there are studies that have shown that interrupted tasks take twice as long and contain twice as many errors as an uninterrupted task. So basically, you want to move those interruptions out of your schedule and into your development process so that you're fixing these things while you're still developing. This is actually one of the studies that talked about when programmers are interrupted. It's actually called Programmer Interrupted. I really like this one because they didn't just monitor keyboard activity, they didn't just do eye tracking. They actually put sensors on the throat and neck of the developers and listen to the noises we make as we code. And this is actually, every dot up there is a different type of noise that a developer who was coding made. We're a noisy bunch. And so They use this to track interruptions, and they found that a developer interrupted at almost any point in their process were going to be starting from scratch when they return to their work. You guys know this. You know that when you're in the zone, you're developing, and you get interrupted, it just wrecks your progress. But studies like this are good things to show clients, good things to show bosses, so that they understand that you're reducing interruptions by using automated testing, and interruptions really do cost them time and money. So speaking of those interruptions, a well-designed automated testing system is going to reduce interruptions, it's going to increase productivity, it's going to increase happiness. So literally, it makes projects healthier, it makes clients happier, it makes developers happier. It is a very good thing. There's no reason that we shouldn't all be doing this. So now that you know why automated testing is important, I want to look at what people are currently testing in Magento. And if you're like me, if you have a computer science background, when you hear automated testing of development, one of the first things you think of might be unit testing. Unit testing is one of the oldest types of automated testing, and it's basically what it sounds like. It's testing individual units of code, individual functions, that sort of thing. You're confirming that given a certain set of input, they return an expected set of output. Unit testing appeals to a lot of developers. It's very logical, it's very analytical. You know how a function should behave. You write a set of tests confirming it behaves that way, and then when you're done, you can just prove, yes, my function works the way it's supposed to work. So in an ideal project, unit testing allows you to confirm that every time you make a change to any part of the project, the entire project still works correctly down to the smallest detail. Unfortunately, Magento is not the ideal project when it comes to unit testing. One does not simply unit test Magento. The reason for that is that great flexibility that we love in Magento really complicates unit testing. There's just not clear entry points and exit points. There's the event observer pattern. There's all these different reasons why Magento is jumping around as it's executing code. Just makes it very challenging to unit test in Magento 1. However, you can unit test individual extensions. You should unit test individual extensions. If you're an extension author, if you're putting extensions out there for Magento, please build unit tests into them. And there's actually an extension that Ivan, you can find him on Twitter there, has released on GitHub that makes it very easy to build PHP unit-based unit tests into your Magento extensions. I'm really hoping that more and more extension authors will start to do this because it will make unit testing in Magento much easier. So in my experience, when developers say they don't have the time to test Magento, they're actually trying to apply unit testing to Magento. And yes, none of us have time to unit test all of Magento. It's just not something that is even physically possible for the average developer. So the breakthrough for most teams that I've worked with is when you realize a really simple fact. It's not that you can't test Magento, it's that you can't unit test Magento. So we have to look beyond unit tests to other types of testing. So there was one type of testing of everyone in the survey who said they were testing Magento, one type that 100% of the responses said they were using, and that was functional tests. Functional tests are similar to unit tests in the sense that you're feeding input data in and checking to make sure the output matches what you expect. However, unit testing is focused on individual functions and modules, and functional testing is focused on testing the entire complete Magento site. So with functional testing, you don't really care what function is being called. You don't care what code is running. You just want the site to work the way the client expects. So functional testing at its most basic level consists of writing tests that automatically browse and use a Magento site and confirm it behaves the way you expect. For instance, a common functional test in Magento attempts to add a product to the cart and then verifies that when it goes to the cart page, there is a product in the cart. So with full test coverage, functional tests will confirm that your Magento site still works as you expect as you add new features. So basically, write tests as you go, write tests for each new feature that you're introducing, and that's building up a great set of regression tests for you. Next up, behavior-driven development. It's another approach to testing Magento. It's also known as BDD. It's an offshoot of test-driven development. And at its heart, BDD is about creating examples-based conversations about how a system should behave. Behavior-driven development has been around for a few years now. One of the main tools for BDD and PHP is Behat. It was released over 4 years ago. Again, though, as a community, we have lagged implementing some of these things into Magento. So it was only 2 years ago that a Magento extension for Behat was created, and still today only a few people are using it, but it is finally catching on. So only 6% of the developers surveyed that said they were testing were using any sort of behavior-driven development, but that number is increasing very quickly. In behavior-driven development, you're focused on the business value your code is supposed to deliver, and you work from examples. You basically have examples of the sort of behavior that you're trying to implement. As you add a new feature, you start by writing a scenario for how that feature should behave. You then turn those scenarios of how the feature should behave into specifications, and specifications are where we lead into our next type of testing. Specification behavior-driven development. I think they were going for a record for like the longest name of a testing methodology. So most people shorten that to spec BDD, and spec BDD takes BDD and layers specifications on top of it. It's literally exactly what it sounds like. It actually helps shorten your development time with BDD, and we're going to see some examples of how this works in a little bit. So rework, redoing things that you previously implemented but that didn't meet the client's expectations can contribute as much to 40% of your development budgets. And using something like spec BDD can greatly reduce, if not eliminate that. So again, if you're having a hard time convincing clients, convincing managers to invest in the time to implement testing, this is the sort of thing you need to show them. Ask them, would you like to save 40% of your budget? And of course they'll say yes. And then you can show them that by using things like spec BDD, you can make that happen. So before we dive into some specific examples, there's one other type of testing that as a community we must be making more use of, and that's performance testing. Unfortunately, only about 50% of Magento developers that are doing any sort of testing are using automated performance testing. And a lot of developers I talked to kind of argued with me about it, said that performance testing is something that needs to be left to whoever's handling the servers. That as long as their code works, it doesn't matter how fast or slow it is. However, in the e-commerce industry, 1 second of load time can mean thousands of dollars for our clients. So performance has to be everyone's responsibility. And too often I've seen developers, especially back-end developers, install an extension, create a new integration, or make some other change to Magento and slow it down, and they don't even realize it. Suddenly the client's saying, my site seems slower. Why is my site slower? And they just assume, oh, it's a problem with the server. It has nothing to do with the code. And then when you stop and look, you do some profiling, you do some testing, and you discover that maybe they've connected to an API that just responds slowly. And as back-end developers, we don't stop and think about those things. And that's why performance testing is very important. So because of this, when you're testing your Magento projects, include performance testing. And go a step further than that, treat poor performance as a bug. That's what it is. As developers, we have to start looking at this as it is a bug and not just something for the sysadmin to worry about. So when performing automated testing of changes you're making, refactor and optimize slow code just like you would buggy code. Because again, slow performance is a bug, especially in the e-commerce world. We have to treat it like that. We have to refactor it. We have to get it out of there. So we've talked about why testing is important. We've kind of had an overview of some of the concepts of testing. So now I want to dive in to how to perform functional, performance, and BDD tests in Magento. So no matter what type of testing you're doing, you need a testing server. This is basically what is going to run your tests for you. This is the automated part of automated testing. In our survey, there were 3 different responses. People were using Bamboo, which is a commercial general purpose testing server. It's by Atlassian, who make Jira and a lot of other tools that I know a lot of us use. There's Jenkins. It's an open source general purpose testing server. And there's PHP CI, which is an open source PHP focused testing server. Only one developer reported using PHP CI for testing Magento. I think that PHP CI is just still a little too new, so it hasn't quite caught on. Of the remainder, 50% are using Bamboo, 50% are using Jenkins. Personally, I used Jenkins for many years, and then I moved to Bamboo. And They're both really similar. The main reason that we moved to Bamboo is we do use Jira. We use all the other Atlassian tools, and there's some good integrations, so we just decided it made more sense for us. For you, though, if you're trying to decide between Jenkins and Bamboo, Jenkins is free, and Bamboo has a $10 starter license. So try both. Pick whichever one you like. Just try them out, take a look at them, see what works best for you, see what works best for your team. You want something that when you roll this out, you want your team to be excited about it. You don't want this to be something that they're like, oh great, Jenkins is nagging me again, I need to go fix this. They need to be excited that there's an automated system helping them improve their code. So take a look at both, see what your team's going to be more excited about, and implement whichever one you prefer. Because again, which testing server you use isn't the important part. The fact that you have a testing server and are testing, that's what's important. So once you select a testing server, your next step is to build and start writing tests. 100% of developers who said they were performing functional tests are using Selenium. Selenium is an excellent open source tool for functional tests. It can be used in a lot of different ways. But basically, at its core, Selenium automates the web browser. That's all it's doing. Tests can be written that automatically visit a Magento site in a various number of browsers and confirm it's working correctly. Selenium can be controlled via PHP test cases using PHP unit, or it can be controlled via its own scripting language, Solanese. Personally, I use the PHP unit support because I just really like working in PHP. I don't want to have to learn yet another language. And ideally, you would write test cases for Selenium that cover all of the basic functionality of Magento, and then as you're implementing new features, you write new test cases that cover those features. And a lot of people ask me, how do you write these test cases? And there's a couple of ways to do it. Selenium actually gives you a browser plugin that you can use to basically record your actions. So you just take that, you go out to the site you're testing, and you hit the record button, and you just run through what you're testing. Then you can tell it, on this page, for the test to pass, this specific selector has to be there. This specific element has to be there. So they make it really easy to write these tests. There's also a lot of good information and tutorials out there on the web about how to use Selenium with PHP unit. So for automated performance testing, the very best tool I've found is Gatling. Gatling is able to test both performance as well as scalability automatically, and it has kind of a cool logo. So Gatling is scripted using the Scala scripting language. Unfortunately, I did have to branch out and not just work in PHP for this one. So in our case, I actually ended up making our sysadmin do that because I said, well, this sounds like a system sort of language. But it's not too bad. So we wrote a standard test suite for Magento, and we're actually using the Gatling 2 release candidate. I don't think it's gone production ready yet, but for us, the release candidate was stable and worked well. So our Gatling test suite visits a category URL. It picks a random product off the category page. It then visits the product page for that product, and it adds the product to the cart and proceeds through checkout. So it stops at each step. It looks to see that there's the different things that it expects, and then it moves on to the next step. And all the way through, it's measuring the time, the success rate, things like that. Really interesting thing about Gatling that I really like it better than some things like Siege, because Gatling can randomize the delays between each step. So what we did is we observed real users actually completing each step, and then we set our ranges for that random delay between each step to match real user behavior. So this isn't a theoretical test that, if someone can actually click in 1 nanosecond, this is the performance level you get. This is a very real world number it gives you. So with Gatling, you specify how many simulated users should visit the site and over what time period those users should be introduced. So an example is we recently had a client appearing on a nationwide TV show, and we configured Gatling and used it to confirm the site was ready for the traffic surge. So this is actually the output that Gatling gives you. This is just the top of the first page. You can drill down into an incredible level of detail with Gatling. In this test, to start out, we ran 25 simulated users over 60 seconds. So that just means that Gatling, over a 60-second span, added 25 simulated users to the site. Here's the summary, as I mentioned, and it actually gives you your minimum, maximum, and mean response times, your standard deviation, your requests per second, a lot of good data. And it breaks it down to your total, and then this is actually each individual step in the test suite. So you can actually see, okay, in this case, checkout was the slowest step, which is what's expected with all the database work that goes into that. So it's a really powerful tool. So then once we were done preparing the site, getting it ready for the traffic surge it was expecting, we reran the test. This time we ran it with 300 users over 600 seconds to confirm that the site was ready for the traffic levels we expected. And so you can see, again, kind of the same information here of requests per second, average response time, things like that. A lot of people ask me how to set those settings in Gatling, what numbers they should pick. And what I always recommend, you want to set it for the maximum simultaneous users you expect on the site. So find your peak, set it for that. As far as a time frame, ideally you would set it to 60 to 120 seconds. And that seems low, but that's because automated tests are most valuable when they complete really quickly. Your automated tests should be fast. You want to be able to test every commit that's made. And ideally, the developer is going to receive feedback from the automated testing system before they go on to the next task. So if you have this amazing test suite that takes 2 hours to run, there's a good chance that the developer's not even going to see it till he's in the office the next day. And at that point, it's almost like being interrupted to fix a bug. You have to go back, you have to remember, okay, what was I working on? What files did I have open? What do I need to change? So you want your tests to be fast so that literally while all of that's still fresh in your mind, if a test fails, you can fix it very quickly. Speaking of failed tests, when you first start working on a project, run your Gatling test suite on the site and develop a baseline for your mean response time and requests per second. Then program your testing server to consider the performance test as failed if you exceed your baseline numbers by more than 20%. Breaking that down real simply, all that means is if you commit a change that makes the site 20% slower or worse, it's treated as a failed test and you go back and fix it. And that way you don't have things slipping through, APIs being added, things like that that are slowing down the site without anyone even realizing it. So this way you get an alert, you look at it, you fix it. This keeps you from constantly slowing the site down as you add new features. So behavior-driven development with PHP. There's really one tool to use, and that's behat. The few people who indicated they were doing any sort of behavior-driven development tasks in Magento are all using this same system. It's a behavior-driven framework. Basically, it runs your BDD tests. As a framework, however, it does a lot more than just testing. It can actually use the results from the tests to automate writing some of the code for you. And then along with behat, there's an extension called behatmage. It's Magento specific, and it provides context into Magento requirements. This way, when you're writing behavior-driven tests, you're not having to explain every single Magento feature. It adds that knowledge to behat so that it's all automatic. Behatmage is available on GitHub. It's written primarily by some of the developers at Session Digital. They're a Magento agency in the UK, but there are also some open source contributors. They are open to pull requests and contributions. So a lot of people have contributed to this and made it a very powerful tool. So I want to work through an example of using behatmage to build and test a Magento feature. The first thing you do is you define a feature. And this might even at first glance look like a request from a client, but this actually is a feature file for behat. Your first line there is just a summary of the feature. So in this case, it says admin user can manage review visibility. So that's just a very short summary. The next line shows the business value and motivation behind the feature. So that our customers are not influenced by a product with bad review history. And then the third line is showing which user or actor you're going to be working with. And the last line is the action. So in this case, it's as an admin user, I want to disable reviews of those specific products. So basically the clients come to us, they've said, hey, I have some products that have bad review history. I want to be able to turn reviews off on just those products. And so we write this feature file in behat. Once you have your feature file defined, you then add the scenario to it. And this, again, it gets a little more technical as far as the sort of mock data there. But for the most part, these things just look like written language that you might see from a client or see from talking about this with another developer. So Behat's very powerful in the way it can actually parse these things. So the first line, again, is just a summary. So in this case, we're getting a little more technical with this scenario, and we're saying turn off reviews per product. Given gives you a precondition. So it's saying before we run this test, the following product will exist. And it's a product with a SKU Ottoman1, the name Ottoman, and it has an attribute accepts reviews that's set to 1. Then we add another precondition by saying and. We say and Ottoman1 has existing reviews. If you're testing turning reviews off, really the only way to test that is if it already has reviews on it. So that's that second precondition there. When starts the action that should occur. So when I turn off reviews for the Ottoman1 product, and then is the expected result. Then no review should be displayed for Ottoman1. So we've got our feature and our scenario written in our file here, and we run Behat. And when you run it, it will show you how many scenarios that you've written, how many of them passed or failed, and then it'll also show you within each scenario you will have steps, and it'll show you how many pass, fail, or undefined. The really cool thing about Behat is that at the end of the output each time, it will say, here's what you need to do next, and here's your code snippet to actually do that. So it's actually writing some code for you. So then the process with Behat and behatmage is you use the code that was provided by Behat in the previous step. You add it to the file. It'll tell you where to put it even. You do that. You run Behat. And it will, again, tell you, okay, your next step is there isn't a product attribute called accept reviews. You need to define that. So again, Behat has guided us straight to our next step. It's told us, as a developer, to implement this feature, this is what you need to do. So then you implement that product attribute, and you run Behat again. And then again, Behat tells you your next step. It says, okay, I don't have a definition to understand has existing reviews. And you continue through this cycle. You run Behat, implement the code it suggests. Run Behat, implement the code it suggests. When you're done, it will finally say, okay, that scenario passes, all those steps pass, you're done. The feature works the way the client wants. Really great part of that is it also then becomes part of your regression testing. You keep all those feature files, scenario files, and steps in place. And so when you're later modifying the site, let's say the client comes back and says, okay, I want to change the reviews behavior and I want reviews to now have this feature as well, then you can make sure that after you've made that change, you run all your tests, and if somehow you broke this feature, it'll alert you. And so before you've deployed that change to the live site, you can say, okay, I need to go back and I need to see how these two features interact, and I need to fix this. So before behatmage, it was tricky using Behat and Magento. But now that we have behatmage, it allows you to easily use Behat and behavior-driven development in Magento. Next up is PHP spec. None of the developers surveyed were using any sort of spec BDD tools. Most of the developers, including not too long ago myself, when you said spec BDD, they said, what? What is that? What are you talking about? You mean BDD? Do you mean TDD? No, spec BDD. However, when I gave a talk on testing at Meet Magento New York a couple of months ago, one developer talked to me afterwards and said, hey, I am using PHP spec. It's amazing. And what PHP spec is it's a great tool that even if you're not a Magento developer, if you're just a PHP developer, look at this tool. It is something that we all should be using, and so I want to go into a little bit more detail about it today. PHP spec is a spec BDD tool. It's a tool that implements specification behavior-driven development. Again, they're going for the longest name they can get, I think. And so while Behat is focusing on the behavior of your new feature, PHP spec helps you write the specification for how your code could actually implement that feature. So it's kind of stepping one step away from the client and one step closer to the code. So your first step with PHP spec is you write a specification file. And luckily these are in PHP. I love this because, again, I want to stay in PHP as much as I can. So this is just a generic PHP example. It's an example specification. where you're going to have a class that has a function to HTML that should convert markdown text to HTML. So in PHP spec, you basically say, this is the function that needs to be tested. This is the input we're going to pass to the function. And then you add your conditions here. So in this case, when this input is passed to this function, it should return this value. And that's it. That's how you write specifications with PHP spec. You run PHP spec after you've written that, and it applies the specification to your code. It lets you know, yes, your code meets the specification. No, it doesn't. And so what you do, it's much like behavior-driven development, test-driven development. With PHP spec, you write your specification, you write just enough code to pass, and then you go back, you refactor, you repeat, and you just continually improve your code. So much like behatmage, we have a tool called magespec. It adds Magento specifics such as Magento blocks, controllers, and helpers to PHP spec. That way it has that Magento specific knowledge, and it's much more powerful for helping you with your Magento projects. Magespec is also on GitHub. Same team actually built that. Some of the developers over at Session Digital and some open source contributors really cannot thank them enough for open sourcing these tools because they have been incredibly powerful and helpful for a lot of Magento developers. So with that, we're going to dive into another example. In this example, we're building a module to tell if a product has reviews. So you don't even have to write your specification. PHP spec will even do that part for you. So your first step here is you're calling PHP spec. You're telling it I'm describing a model and that's the model name that I'm describing. PHP spec will then say, hey, I'm going to create that specification for you. It even tells you this is exactly where, based on its knowledge of PHP, but also its knowledge of Magento, it says, okay, if you're writing this extension with this model name, this is the exact directory it needs to be in. And for those of you that were in my tutorial on Magento on Tuesday, you saw that Magento has a lot of directories. There's a lot of places that you may or may not need to write files for your new modules. This is a good way to shortcut some of that and to have it basically tell you exactly where your file needs to go. So here's the code that PHP spec generates. This is your generated specification file. It's showing that you should have a class, and the class should be of the correct type. So while it does write the specification for you, it can't read your mind. It doesn't know exactly what the specification should look like. So it does just the basics from what it can infer from the name and other information that you gave it. So PHP spec wrote our specification for us. Again, I love these tools that are basically doing the grunt work for us so we can focus on the more interesting parts of development. Now we take that specification and we're going to extend it to actually implement the logic of telling if a product has reviews. So we add a function to our specification file. And the function literally is called it tells if a product has reviews, because that is what it does. It's very much, this is about writing things that do exactly what they say. Your first step there, you are saying that you're going to load a specific product, load a SKU, and that's just so that when you're testing, you get the same results. You want to test with the same product so that you get the same results, so that it's a valid test. The second line there, though, right here, this is where kind of the magic happens in the specification. It's saying that after your extension has loaded this product, you call a function has reviews, and it should return the value of true. Because you're going to set it up to where this product has reviews, and you know that your function should return true in that case. So that's your specification file. You run PHP spec again, and it'll say, wait, you need this class. This class doesn't exist in your extension. And the great part is it says, do you want me to create this for you? And I always wonder why they say that, because does anyone say no? I mean, if a tool is going to write some code for me, I'm going to let it. So you say yes, and then it says, okay, this has been created. And again, going back to some of the complexity of needing to know where to put files in Magento, it, thanks to magespec, knows exactly that it needs to be in this case, this example is using the company name of magespec, and the extension name is reviews, and it's a model, and so it goes in the model directory, and it needs to be called product.php. So it's done that for you. So PHP spec wrote the class for us. You run PHP spec again, it's going to detect that there's a missing function. You'll never guess what it does. It writes the function for you. So it's literally doing your work. Maybe don't show your bosses this part. So now there is still a little bit of work to do. We haven't fully automated ourselves out of a job yet. Here's the specification that PHP spec has, or actually the code that PHP spec has written for us. So this is your actual extension code for how to implement this behavior in Magento. And again, I mean, look at this part. As a new Magento developer, you may not necessarily know what model your extension should have extended from. Magespec tells you, does it for you. So you don't even have to have that knowledge. I mean, obviously, it's good knowledge to have. Do go out there, learn the Magento core. But in the meantime, if you're just starting out and you want to make sure that you're doing all these things the right way, Magespec is a great tool for you to use. So it knows from our specification that there needs to be a function called load, and it needs to take an argument. And then it also knows that there's a function called hasReviews. And so it's created both those functions, and then it tells you, okay, your logic for loading a product, put it right here. Your logic for telling if that product has reviews, put that here. So there is still some work to do, but I look at it this way. You didn't have to figure out where do I put these files. You didn't have to figure out what model does this extend from. You didn't have to do any of that. Literally, you're focused on, okay, what is the logic that actually drives this feature that I'm implementing? You're not doing the housekeeping of, okay, I need to go create a directory structure. I need to go create files. They need to have this boilerplate text in them. It eliminates all that busy work and gets you straight to the real development work.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
With the regular PHP spec,
Mhm.
Mage prefix,
Mhm.
do the same thing?
Yes. What Magespec does is it adds just the Magento knowledge. So PHP spec by itself can run through these same steps. It just, if you try to run it on Magento without Magespec, it just gets confused as to where everything goes. So when you're putting together Magespec and behatmage, what you do is you define your features first in behat, and then you define your specifications with Magespec. When you combine these two tools, they really are writing a lot of the code for you. It allows you to focus in and spend your time on the logic you're implementing and not all that housekeeping, boilerplate, busy work. So again, even if you eliminate the savings from not having to redo features that were implemented wrong, using these tools save you time just because you're not having to, okay, I'm creating directories, I'm creating files, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. It's going to save you time. It's going to save your clients money. So the best way to use PHP spec and behat on your Magento project, or really any project, is start from the beginning. The next project you start, use these tools. It's a lot easier to start fresh than to try to add these to an existing project that you're halfway through. The great thing is if you do that, if you start from the beginning and you use it throughout the life cycle of your project, you can really speed up your development time. It's building up that test coverage. It's allowing you to test all your existing features as you keep going. So again, if the client comes back with a different request and you implement that and it somehow disrupts an existing feature, you're alerted immediately. You fix it before the client sees you fix it before the task even goes to QA. I mean, you've just saved a significant amount of time there by using these tools. So I could talk about automated testing all day. Several days. I could probably have a conference on Magento and automated testing. There's a lot more to cover, and literally some of this, there are already developers out there making it even better. There's already a lot of this that is evolving and changing. So it's just not something that we can cover all of. So I'm going to kind of cut to a summary. And to recap, it's not that you can't test Magento, it's that you can't unit test Magento. What you can do is you can use functional tests, you can use behavioral testing, and you absolutely must start using performance testing. Many people assume that automated testing makes projects take longer, cost more, but I hope all of y'all have learned now through these examples that the opposite is true. You're catching problems faster, you're cutting down on busy work, and you're allowing for more complete testing than you could ever do by hand. So literally, automated testing is going to save developers, managers, clients time, stress, happiness. It is a great process that we should all be using. Hopefully y'all agree with me. And so I have 3 steps for all of us to take next. First of all, let's keep talking. Not everyone's going to agree with what I said. Sometimes I get some feedback on TDD versus BDD and things like that. I know there's a lot of debates going on that. So tweet at me, go to my blog, find me. You know, I'm out there on the internet, or we can talk later at the conference as well. So again, tweet at me. Let me know. Again, some of the things that I added here today about PHP spec were thanks to someone coming up to me after another talk and saying, hey, good talk, but why didn't you cover PHP spec? More people need to use it. So definitely keep the conversation going. I'll be here all day today and tomorrow. Also, the second task for us, they're still setting the schedule, and the talks are still being selected for Magento Imagine, which is the big annual Magento development or Magento everything conference. However, there's a lot of demand from the community for more talks about testing. So whether it's me or someone else, I know there will be people at Magento Imagine in talks, in bar camps, and just open spaces talking about testing. So if you're really serious about working with Magento, Magento Imagine is going to be in Las Vegas again, and it's April 20th through 22nd, and it's definitely worth attending. It's a good place to kind of continue this discussion in person of automated testing with Magento. Finally, as a community, we have to be educating our peers, our managers, and our clients about the importance of automated testing. I'm going to repeat this survey next summer. When I do, I want a majority of people saying that they are doing all of these things, that they are conducting this sort of automated testing. The only way that's going to happen is if we spread the word. If we just let people know you can do this, show them things like magespec and behatmage, show them how much time it's going to save them. Finally, to help kind of spread the word, and because I know a lot of people say, well, I don't really know how to get started with automated testing in Magento. At Creatuity, we're going to be open sourcing our testing tools and test cases. I want this to be a foundation that all of us can build on top of, trying to make it a fast, flexible, reusable set of functional and performance tests. The project's going to be on GitHub in the near future. I'll announce it on Twitter. If you're interested in helping out, if you're even interested in just maybe testing it out, tweet at me and just say, hey, I want to help you with your testing suite, or I want to even use it on some of my projects. And thank you all for your time. Really appreciate it. I know it's still kind of early, so I'm glad to see this many people interested and engaged about Magento testing. Again, you can find me on the web at joshuawarren.com. You can find me on Twitter at Joshua S. Warren. Do let me know your feedback. Go to Joined In, rate the talk. You're going to see me tweeting a lot today until I see, counting how many people are in here. Okay, now I know until this many people have rated the talk, I'm going to keep nagging y'all on Twitter to go to Joined In and rate the talk. So please do that. Leave some comments. Give me some specifics. And with that, do y'all have any questions?
Okay, question. So using the magespec and so how does that come into play with like your own modules? Like I noticed that a lot of that code is just dumping it right into the application structure. If you're using something like Modman, will it put that into the module itself, or does it just kind of dump it right into the application and then want you to move that code back?
So are you, I guess basically, are you developing an extension? Is that what you're saying? Or?
Well, I mean, if I'm doing a feature for a client, if it's not my own extension that I'm trying to sell.
Right.
Most likely it's going to be it's still going to be its own extension.
Right.
And I'm still going to separate that out. So
Running.
Even if you're doing an extension specifically for it, it's generally a separate thing, and you probably separate that out into its own Modman folder, right? So how does that just dump it into the directory structure and you kind of move it out?
Yeah, it's going to dump it in there. Depending on how you're using Modman, though, if you have already initialized the extension and Modman has set up its symlinks, then in theory it should work. But it is still a little messy. It's an area that could be improved on. So, all right.
And another one. So in your office, like who's generally writing
We have a mix for functional testing, especially for a new site or if we've just installed a new theme. Our QA team does that just because you have to go through the site and you have to write a functional test for everything. And it's time consuming and it's not necessarily related to specific code. But for behavioral tests, for specifications, for things like that, that is most valuable when it's the developer. Like the developer that's actually going to implement the task, if they're the ones writing the test as part of the development process, that helps them. You'll be surprised as you write the test, in the back of your mind, you kind of have gears going saying, okay, this is actually how I'm going to implement the logic. So it gives you some inspiration. So yeah, that's how we kind of split it up on our team. So what else?
Do you keep a separate test database, or is the test data part of the tests you're writing?
There's a few different ways to do it. There's some really neat tools. If you go out to where behatmage and magespec are on GitHub, there's some people in that same group, it's called Mage Test, that are working on different things to help you mock things and have sort of that sample data and things like that. What we do is originally we just ran it against our QA database. We would have a QA copy of the site. We have been moving, though, towards having a QA database and having what we call a CI database, a continuous integration database. It's basically a copy of the QA database, but we found that if the automated tests fire off while someone is doing some manual QA work, it kind of messed with things. It caused some unpredictable results. So we basically clone the QA database, which is in turn cloned from our dev database, which is in turn cloned from the live database. So.
Have you ever heard of code conception? Or codeception? Codeception.com. It's just a tool that somebody just told me about on our team, and it was pretty interesting.
Okay. No.
Oh, yeah, codeception.
Cool, I'll check that out. Yeah, there's a lot of things. With Code Climate being here, I kind of played with their system a little bit with Magento 2, and it was interesting seeing how that worked. But it wasn't the worst. It actually wasn't too bad. What got me was Code Climate shows you trends, and it was trending down. And I said, "Oh, we're getting closer to release. I want it to be trending up." So
It's not released.
yeah, we're not quite there yet. So yeah. Well, there was another one, Scrutinizer, that someone told me about. So yeah. Cool.
How come no JMeter tests? How come no talk about JMeter at all?
Because we really use Gatling for a lot of that. We kind of use both, and it was funny. I kind of made that announcement that we were using Gatling, and the Magento core team had started using JMeter, and they came to me and they said, "Hey, we started using JMeter with Magento 2. What's Gatling?" And so a lot of it is just what you know. In our case, we tried both, and we just got better results with Gatling.
Yeah, the JMeter tests for Magento 2 don't work very well at all.
Yeah. A lot of that's still kind of a moving target, so yeah.
But I mean, it's called BlazeMeter. Actually, it's a tool very similar to Gatling.
Okay.
Or to one of the tools you described where it can grab bits and pieces of what you're doing through the browser.
Yeah.
But then when you get to checkout, it completely fails.
Yeah.
And I was kind of wondering if you have the same issues when you're using the other tools you described with checkout, because it's rather complex.
It is. One of the reasons I'm excited about open sourcing a lot of this is our sysadmin just hit his head up against the server a lot writing those tests with Gatling, because a lot of Magento with the security features, it's designed to not let bots complete checkout, which is a good thing, except for testing. So yeah, we had to do some things to kind of adapt it so that it is able to complete checkout.
That's by far the biggest challenge I've had.
Yeah.
Is the checkout error.
How long do your builds normally take?
When we first started, we used an old version of the Magento testing framework. It took about 14 hours. And that's when we sort of started on this journey of there has to be a better way. Now, lately, I want to say it's about 15 minutes. A lot of it depends on the site, because we sanitize all of our databases so they don't have customer data in them, but it has all the product data. So if you're testing a site that has 100,000 products, just cloning the database and things like that take a little while. So.
Are you using Selenium or possibly Phantom.js for those tests?
We're using Selenium. I've looked at Phantom.js, and actually I was at a Magento meetup in Germany, and someone was talking about Dalek.js, which it's literally Dalek as in the Doctor Who character. So, and so I've been looking at that one as well. So we have done some work with testing and Phantom.js, but kind of the test suite we were setting up, it just didn't fit in well with. So.
New Magento release. Just now.
Yes, they announced it. Yeah. Yeah, so all of you that are interested in Magento, at Magento Live Australia, they just announced the next major release for both Magento Enterprise and Community. It has some really cool features. People that were asking on Tuesday or even yesterday at some of the Magento talks about how long is Magento 1 going to be supported? Are there going to be new features? They just added some cool new features to Magento 1 that they released today. And so they're still maintaining it. They're still adding features to it. Again, that goes back to why testing with Magento 1 is important, because people really are going to be using Magento 1 for years to come. eBay's going to keep supporting it, keep pushing out updates. So, yeah.
I'll check the release, but did they mention anything about PHP 5.5 support?
Yep, PHP 5.5 support.
There we go.
MySQL 5.6 as well.
Yeah. So, yeah, and a lot of the things that I had already seen on it were kind of the marketing spin on it. But from the marketing side, they've added some features that used to people had to buy extensions for and things like that. So that's very cool. Some powerful stuff. So go check that out. And go test the new versions of Magento 1 as well. So, any other questions? No? All right. Well, thank you all so much for your time.